Hey, what's up? So I saw the Five Nights at Freddy's movie last night, and honestly, it was pretty decent. Like, I wouldn't say anything like superb or anything like super fantastic like that, but like if you think pretty decent enough in the best way possible, then yeah, I think that sort of like, this movie can fit into like, that category. Like when it started, it kind of has like a little like I guess quiet sort of atmosphere, quiet enough to like, oh, this is a horror movie or this is some sort of like, creepy sort of like shit. But it didn't once, go in my head that like, oh, when is something gonna happen? When is something gonna like, excite me or like anything like that? Like I patiently waited throughout like the entirety of like its build up, and I didn't feel the need to like, I don't know, like look to the side or whatever. It's like, come on, like where's the shit? Where are the fucking animatronic whatever the fucks? And and I thought that was like, pretty cool. And the fact that like it's this, psychological thriller where like this guy is, grieving his brother, and he kind of gets the help from like these fucking ghost kids that have like no idea that they were like, killed and shit. And it's interesting because they actually flat out say at some point in the movie that like, oh, kids first learn to like understand the world through like pictures and shit, and like that's why they sort of like, do drawings. And it made the villain of this movie look all the more twisted that like, okay, the fact that like they think of this as, let's say, oh, we're just in this like, kids establishment and we're just like, having fun together, blah blah blah, and like this guy, like the fucking yellow guy is like, really, I don't know, like nice to us or some shit, so we have like loyalties towards him and like that kind of stuff. And the guy who's grieving after his brother has a sister, and they want to like recruit her with them because you can imagine it from like a kid's point of view, where it's like, oh, we just want you to play with us, blah blah blah. They don't necessarily think anything sort of like sinister. And I had like mixed feelings like watching it, because obviously I guess you're sorta supposed to think that like the kids in this movie, like their spirits and these like animatronics are like, the, I guess, villains, quote unquote, or like, they're sort of like the attackers in this like movie, so to speak. But then you also understand that like these are just kids, so they don't really have this like, maturity to, I guess, like understand like the scope of like what they're doing. So in a lot of ways, yes, they sincerely, I imagine, like really do just want like another friend to play with, because I guess like from their point of view, it's like, oh, we just want you to be one of us, like, oh, be friends with us, blah blah blah, this and that. And I can imagine it was so easy for them to like forget being like murdered by the dude that essentially is the reason that like why they're trapped there in the first place, is because like, okay, these kids have like, a very limited vocabulary, I imagine, because like they're young, so their idea of like conceptualizing and understanding, putting like thoughts together like in their head is like, quite limited, obviously, as how it would be for a child. So I enjoy the fact that like literally in order to make them like, like remember the sister of the guy whose brother died, and is going through that like, emotional sort of like turmoil, she literally had to draw a picture of them like, dead, just so I guess it's like they could see it in their mind, instead of like, because like I imagine that like, okay, it played back instead of like, really thinking about it. So yeah, it was pretty creepy and like, eerie, because kids were like made to be pawns for this guy that killed them, and they don't even realize it because they don't have like, let's say, like the understanding that like, okay, there is, I guess, like, something else, but like, oh no, we're just kids, so we just live in this like fantasy sort of like dreamland where like, oh, we can have fun together, we can whatever. And I like that it kind of leaves it open ended, because like once they realize all this, and I guess they kind of take their revenge on, the guy that like killed them in the first place. Like I remember at the end, like there's this one kid, he kind of just like closes the door on him, and I guess like it leaves it open to like interpretation. Like I don't know, like what does that mean in particular? I'm not even sure. Like, are they free now while he's here to like rot, or are they going to keep him as like, you know, somebody that they essentially torture for like forever in a way? Because I imagine the guy that did kill them, is like fucking dead. Because like I remember like he had the fucking animatronic things like seep into like his body, so I imagine he'd be dead. But also like the only other question I have though is like, yeah, kind of like what I mentioned, because there's a guy grieving over his like brother that like died. What's it about with his brother? Like, why wouldn't he turn into a spirit as well, like those other kids that were essentially murdered by like the same guy? So I guess that's the only thing that I'm wondering about. And like just to expand on like why I really think it's creepy that like these kids don't really understand like the harm that they're doing when they just want like this guy's sister Abby to be like one of them, one of the other kids that like they play with and stuff, is that a lot of you can most likely relate to, I don't know, let's say being the kid who goes over to your friend's house, let's say, hoping that like they can come out and play or something, and then let's say their mom or their dad or whatever says that they can't, pull some sort of like excuse why, blah blah blah, this and that. So then I don't know, maybe you try to negotiate a little bit and like think to yourself, okay, then what about tomorrow, or what about the day after that, because you really really want to spend time with your friend. And maybe because you don't have like much going on obviously, and like you're just a kid, you just want to like play with like your friends or some shit, you constantly come over to this particular friend's house in the hope that like maybe this is the day they'll get to like come out and play and stuff. So yeah, that's simple enough to like understand. But like what's the creepy factor in that is because like I'm sure this is probably what's going through the psychology of like a lot of those kids, you know? So it's like to them it really is like nothing. So then like when you consider that, like how are you supposed to feel about these kids, you know? Because obviously you can think to yourself, you don't want them to like kill Abby, turn her into like a fucking animatronic, kind of like how they are. But then again, because these are kids, they're doing these like messed up things, I guess in like an innocent sort of way, if that even makes sense. Like I don't really know how to comprehend it in my mind, to be honest. Okay, and like even when these kids finally understand like whatever happened to them, I'm still kind of wondering if they actually do process and understand what all of that like actually entails. Like, do they realize that they essentially had like their whole lives robbed away from them because of what this guy did? Or are they simply just thinking, oh, we don't like you because you were that person that actually hurt us, and you're not supposed to do that if you claim to be somebody's friend? And is it just that alone, or do they also understand that like first thing I said? It's like, I don't know.